Iran has proposed a mutual reopening of the strait, leaving the nuclear discussion for later in the process. Would the president agree to that kind of phased negotiation?
I will confirm the president has met with his national security team this morning. The meeting may be ongoing, maybe not. The proposal was being discussed. What I will reiterate is that the president's red lines with respect to Iran have been made very, very clear, not just to the American public, but also to them as well.
That was White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirming the president was briefed on Iran's latest proposal for the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Tehran would reportedly reopen the critical waterway, but only if the U.S. stops its blockade in the region, and they pushed back about any nuclear negotiations. They want that to be at a later date. But a nuclear-armed Iran remains one of President Trump's biggest red lines. I want to bring in Fox News senior strategic analyst and chairman for the Institute for the Study of War, General Jack Keane. General, good morning. It's always a pleasure to have you on the program.
Yeah, delighted to be here, Cheryl.
Your thoughts on where we are right now?
Yeah, well, first, let's just take a look from the Iranian perspective. They closed the Straits of Hormuz a little over 3 weeks ago, and out of that, the war stopped, and we went into negotiations with them. And so during 3 weeks of negotiations, I think it's pretty revealing where we are. I mean, they are not ever going to meet President Trump's demands, in other words, and have an acceptable deal. They've dug their heels in here. What they do is they dangle out the possibility of a negotiated settlement, because their objective is to drag out the negotiations as much as possible. We did have a deadline, and we've gone past the deadline now. And what do you mean by dragging it out? What they want is more political and economic pressure on the president just to stop the war. That's kind of where they're at. They believe the reason for the ceasefire and going into negotiations was a result of shutting down the Straits of Hormuz and the pressure being applied to the president. And they've dug their heels in. And listen, our blockade is very effective. 80% of the revenue is being denied to Iran, and that's not sustainable for them, obviously. It could lead to an economic collapse of the country at some point. But here's the point. This regime that is running the country now, they are as hardliner as anybody has ever seen in a 47-year history of the regime. They're digging their heels in, and we have to look at them through their own prism, not through ours, not through our values and what's reasonable. They don't care about their people. If there are gas lines, if there's electricity shortages in entire cities, they are digging their heels in here because they don't care about the suffering of the people. They've already demonstrated that in killing them by the tens of thousands and letting the people get to this incredible economic situation that already exists. Oh. So where is the Trump administration? They're reassessing, Cheryl, and they did that yesterday. And I think what the reassessment is likely going to lead to, at least I think it should lead to, is one, continue the blockade for sure. Two, recognize that we're not going to get a negotiated settlement with these hardliners and go back to combat operations, full throttle combat operations. We had about 25% more things to do, 2 weeks of it. Let's finish that off, finish what we started, and then open up the Straits of Hormuz. I think that's a reasonable path. And frankly, if we haven't told these leaders who we're negotiating with, if we go back to combat operations, they're going to be held accountable, and their personal survival is going to be target one, then we're missing a boat. I'm sure we have done something like that. Well, so that, I think, is a reasonable path, and I'm thinking that's the administration is certainly yesterday's meeting probably was likely all about what to do next.
Well, I mean, it's an economic blockade, and we've heard the Treasury Secretary talk about this, that, you know, you choke off the economy, and then maybe the people rise up. I've got Liz Peek on set, and she has a question about the leadership in particular for you.
Yeah, good morning, General. You talk about the regime and how hardline it is. Do we know who's in charge, and are the people we've been negotiating with representing that regime?
Yeah, Ahmad Vahidi, who heads the IRGC, is actually the most powerful person there. He commanded the Quds Force and was succeeded in doing that by Qasem Soleimani, to give you a sense of how long he's been in the IRGC and how long he's committed to it. Definite power vacuum. When the Ayatollah was killed, his son took over. He's doesn't have the influence and power that his father had, so that created a vacuum, and it was a struggle for leadership. It's not too surprising that the guy with all the guns versus the political leaders is really calling the shots. And certainly who we're negotiating with are being controlled by Ahmed Vahidi. So, listen, I think we have to realize that negotiations are not making any progress. They're not going to make a deal with President Trump over the things that are most important to the United States. And I think that's pretty obvious. So I think we got to move away from negotiations and get back to what we started to do from the very beginning. Take all of their predatory military capability away from them, so weaken this regime that it becomes vulnerable to rising up inside the country. We can't do that. That's something the Iranian people have to do. Can the Mossad and the CIA work to help that a little bit? I think so, and I'm assuming they are already doing things.
Well, the intelligence from Mossad has been nothing short of spectacular and so incredibly thorough in their infiltration of Iran, even before this conflict began with the United States. I want to ask you about Iran's foreign minister meeting with Russia's Vladimir Putin yesterday. Now, Putin says he's supporting Iran. He's pledged that support, and they're going to help Tehran serve their interests. What do you say to that?
Well, certainly. I mean, we already know that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea have been collaborating and cooperating now for several years. They all maintain their sphere of influence in their region, but they made it a point, thinking a number of years ago, that the United States was much more vulnerable, its leadership wasn't as strong, and we can take advantage of that. And what Russia's interest in here is Iran's survival. China's interest is the same, and that's why they're helping them. Now, Russia's got a little bit of benefit from the war, to be sure, because prices went up at a time that Russia's fighting a war of their own, and certainly financially they are struggling. That has assisted them. But look what Iran has done for Russia. They built a manufacturing plant that developed those one-way drones that have been so destructive to the Ukrainian people, hundreds of them coming at them in the evening. We've all seen the videos and what that represents in terms of the destruction of the people and the civilian infrastructure, energy particularly. Mm-hmm. These are one-way drones that go 1,000 miles, and they're so-called killer drones. They developed that technology for Russia. Interesting enough, Russia has given some of those drones back to the Iranians to assist them here. So this partnership is very, very real. Russia's interest, Iran is a foothold in the Middle East for them. They do not want to give that up, for sure. And by the way, China is a major financier of the war, to be sure, as well. And they're all in a partnership here, helping to sustain Iran in this fight.
Well, China is buying, Iranian oil and has been for decades, unfortunately. General, it's always great to have you on the program. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Yeah, great talking to you. Thank you.
All right, General Jack Keane. We'll be right back, everybody.